We probably have to start calling the Vikings like real contenders now, right? Right? Welcome to Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so much, especially when they are bearing with me through some technical difficulties on the road, okay? I apologize that yesterday's show had some sound glitches, hotel Wi-Fi, not a lot I can do about that, but we're back. So hello, everybody. Welcome in. If you are new here, you're joining in because you're really excited about the Vikings and you were looking for Vikings podcasts, you have come to a wonderfully correct place. This show is wherever you find your favorite podcasts, Monday through Friday. You can find it anywhere you listen to shows, including SiriusXM, where you can also get live Vikings broadcasts. If you search out Vikings, you can get the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet and you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It's Twitter Tuesday today, and that means that almost immediately after stepping off of a plane, delirious, a little punchy, I'm going to answer your questions, and it's going to go how it goes. You can send me questions wherever you want on email. You can send me an email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. You can fill out the Google form in the show notes at any time. It's linked in the show notes to any podcast episode, or you can just send them to me on Twitter when I put out the call sometime on Monday mornings usually. First question that I'm going to answer today asks if the Vikings we saw in the first 3 weeks of the season are truly how the team performs. What are our Super Bowl chances? This is an interesting way to do the like contender pretender thing. We can talk about like sustainability metrics, and I'm sure we will all season long, and are they doing particularly well on third downs, and that's not sustainable, or fumble luck, or any of that other stuff that people will use to like discredit the Vikings because they don't want to have been wrong preseason. I'm fine with having been wrong preseason. I'm having a blast. You can't hurt me. But this is an interesting way to go about it. Like, if the Vikings are real, assuming the Vikings are really this and that there's nothing weird and fluky going on, what are the odds? So let's just go to FanDuel, right? Right now, the Vikings Super Bowl odds at FanDuel are plus 2,300, bringing them dead tied with the Green Bay Packers, by the way. That puts them and the Packers tied for 13th best odds in the league, so slightly above average in terms of that. But those Super Bowl odds see the Vikings as a possible fluke team, right? Like, there are people betting these odds, influencing these numbers, that think that there's a chance that the Vikings fall away. That possibility is melded in there. So if we take that out, what would they be? I don't know. You would probably treat them like maybe the Bills. Bills are third right now. If the team that blew the crap out of the Houston Texans and pretty much did the same to the 49ers, a late sort of doomed rally doesn't move me a lot. That team probably should be in the top 5. If that's true and it's real and there's no, and we're told by God that it's not going to fall away. That puts them at like 750 plus 750 Super Bowl odds. So that's something to work with. But that is, if we want to do the like contenders pretenders thing, the difference is, do you believe that this keeps going? Yesterday on the show, my biggest concern, honestly, when I was recording in the hotel room, was Sam Darnold's knee, which I should mention. They got really positive news: a bruise, no structural damage, shouldn't miss any time, might not even miss a practice. So that's great. And I think if we're going to envision the world where it does fall away, it's probably because Sam Darnold stops getting away with it. Weird shovel passes and ill-advised, testing windows, stuff like that. That eventually he does it one too many times and a team, figures out how to punish it, and he has like a turnover catastrophe game. And then that like causes some big spiral. That's what needs to happen here. Hasn't happened yet. And they're 3-0. Kudos to him. Cam Bynum's movie director asks, are we sure the Vikings are not Super Bowl contenders? I think you kind of have to say they are now. They're 3-0, and strength of schedule has not been kind. And like, okay, so I looked around a little bit at like what national media was saying, listening to shows like Heed the Call and listening to other like national outlets and kind of what they're saying. And people are calling the Vikings like the story of the season is the Minnesota Vikings and Sam Darnold. I think you could, like, if you wanted to hate, you could easily write off the Giants game. And if you really wanted to, you could write off the 49ers game as like a fluke. Oh, they were missing McCaffrey. Like, you could make those excuses. But like at a certain point, they demand your respect. And I think beating the Texans by 27 points demands your respect as a contender. I think we're there. And like, I think you're being unreasonable if you're not there with them. Take 2 ugly losses and this all changes, but like that's kind of what it's starting to take, is like sustained bad play to prove like that this is the new status quo that now needs to be proven wrong. I think there's a changing of the vibe there. Similarly, Skeptical Skull asks, what are the chances the 49ers and Texans are bad teams? Pretty low to me. The 49ers were missing a lot of guys in that Rams game, kind of because of the Vikings game. That game was very physical and a lot of players didn't make it to the next one. I still respect the Texans. Like, personally, I don't think those teams are bad teams. I would just say I think that they are not bad teams and leave it at that. What are the chances, probabilities? I don't know. In what way do we know anything? But I don't think that they're bad teams. I think the Vikings beat good teams really well, and I think they deserve their credit for that. Next question comes from JG, who asks, during a Tuesday mailbag in the preseason, you opined there was a 5% chance that Darnold would be QB1 for the Vikings in 2025. What is your percentage today? So, you guys are going to think I'm really weird, but I think it's gone down. And the reason I think it's gone down, okay, it's just chill, don't leave, don't yell at me. Okay, let me explain. The reason that I think it's gone down is because when I answered that question in the mailbag, we had seen nothing from JJ McCarthy. I don't think camp had even started. Now, McCarthy went through all of his camp and that one preseason game, and now he's hurt. But what we now know is just how much the Vikings and O'Connell himself are enamored with this kid. It's not what he showed in that game, which was more good than bad, but just one preseason game, never going to move the needle too much. Shouldn't move the needle all that much for you. But throughout this entire process, if you listen to not the way the Vikings have reported it, but the way the beat reporters have reported it, and the beat reporters will be scathing if that's the way that things, that the vibe that they're getting, right? They have all in lockstep said, holy crap, these guys love JJ McCarthy. So now that we know that, I do feel a little bit like this is a Nick Foles situation in Philly, where he could lead them all the way to the promised land and get a statue and still go be a free agent, and be like the first MVP QB that gets free agency, that hits free agency. Sam Darnold right now, plus 2,800 to be MVP. So we're a ways away on that. But like, I still envision that happening, and that's no shade to Darnold. I think that the scenario is just still that everybody involved, including Darnold himself, understands that this is a rental operation. And Sam Darnold is playing for someone else's money, not the Vikings. He's still playing for money. He's going to get paid by somebody. We're getting Sam paid. That's the year, right? And especially if he keeps up this level of play, he might get paid a lot by somebody. But that money ain't going to be Minnesota's. That's just not the way that they've planned this. And I think that they kind of already have made that decision. So what could Darnold do is a question Steven Denver asks. What does Sam Darnold need to do to have the Vikings re-sign him? I think you need to start talking like Super Bowl and an MVP and like, so much that it's completely undeniable. But a pretty good year, division title, second round playoff exit, and we go, so long and thanks for all the fish. Go enjoy your $30 million a year Baker Mayfield contract from somebody. We're going with the kid that we love so much. Never try to separate a head coach from his hand-picked QB. Ed Helinski says, be honest, going into Sunday's game, did you think the Vikings could rope and hog tie the Texans with relative ease? I like your language there. Very good journalistic pun making about the bull motifs of the Texans. Well struck there, Ed. No, absolutely not. You want me to be honest? Okay, here. I mean, I'm always honest. Okay, go back to what I said on Friday or on Thursday. I knew it was going to be a tough game. I have respect for the Texans. I think they're a good team. I genuinely think that they're an AFC contender. And so I thought this is going to be a tough one. They just beat another tough team, so I feel like they're going to be able to hang. But I thought it was going to be a hard-fought game. The Vikings were missing a couple of pieces. So I thought being underdogs at home was appropriate, but only slight underdogs at home was appropriate. And I think they entered the game as 2-point dogs at home. So I thought that that was about fair. Absolutely did not see a 27-point shellacking coming. That is way better than I thought they were going to be able to do. And the Texans played way worse than I thought. I thought that, like, I know that like pre-snap penalties has been a thing for them, but it was such a thing. Did not think it was going to have as much of an impact on that game. So yeah, kudos to the Vikings. They outplayed their expectations for the third week in a row. And hey, guess what? They're dogs again. Got a whole bunch of Brian Flores questions coming up, as well as some other miscellaneous stuff. So we'll keep rolling here on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is the best place to find a candidate that is right for you and your company. Every company is unique. Everything is a snowflake, right? You have your own needs, your own culture, your own expectations for the job, even jobs that there are a lot of sales jobs, but no two sales positions are the same. And if you've worked in hiring for a long time, and especially for multiple firms, you understand that, and the differences can be really striking. So LinkedIn helps you with all kinds of great tools for hiring, like a feature that they just launched that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. And the thing about LinkedIn is it's not just a job board. It's like practically a social media. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're missing out on people that might be perfect for your job and maybe even willing to leave their job for your job, but just aren't actively looking right now. So go check that out. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Moving right along here with this Locked On Vikings mailbag. It is Twitter Tuesday, and I am almost lucid. Let's move on to some Brian Flores stuff. I am in the exact realm of sanity required to discuss Brian Flores' defense, and that is to say, not entirely sane. Viking Jack asks, as we know, Brian Flores is an absolute chaos merchant and seems to be one of one in terms of style. How is it possible for an offense to be so well prepared for the other defensive schemes when they practiced against a demon like Flores every week? So in camp, you do a lot more like ones versus ones on defense. During week to week, the answer to this question is the scout team. So this is Brett Rippin, right? Brett Rippin. This is, all of your practice squad guys spend their time researching and learning what the other team is supposed to look like. And maybe even a week ahead of time, at least it kind of would make sense to, right? So they have been looking at the Packers for the last week and learning how to simulate what the Packers are and learning their plays. And so you go practice against that. And the same thing goes for like scout offense. I imagine Flores and his staff has part to do with that, but yeah, the problem that you're thinking of where maybe what if they go up against a not very blitz heavy team that runs a lot of cover 3 and the Vikings don't do a lot of that. They're a lot of Tampa 2 and quarters right now. What you'd be getting the wrong experience, right? So that's what the scout team is kind of for, is to simulate the next opponent. And in doing so, hopefully those young guys learn a whole bunch of different systems and a whole bunch of different values, and hopefully they kind of develop in that. Nolan M asks, how often does Flores run 3 safeties and which 2 corners are in for those packages? Which safety comes off when we run 3 corners? So I looked this up and I was shocked to find out that when they're in true nickel, 3 corners, 2 safeties, the 2 safeties are Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus. Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus, the only 2 defenders that played the entire game against the Houston Texans. So that means Harrison Smith is the one coming off the field. It makes sense when you think about it for a second. Like, he's older, get him his rest. But like Harrison Smith rotating off the field is a very weird pill for me to swallow. That feels wrong. I get it, but oh wow, it's weird. But maybe that's, it's just, time comes for us all, I guess. And on the other hand, the corner that comes off in terms of just like participation, I think it rotates. Byron Murphy had the most snaps against the Texans. Shaq Griffin and Steph Gilmore had 44 and 42 respectively. So seems like there's a little bit of a rotation there. How often they go to three safeties though is if Harrison Smith was on the field 76.2% of the time, he played 48 snaps. I think they're doing a lot of what I'll call big dime, 6 D-backs, but it's 3 safeties and 3 corners. I think a lot of that was happening this week, especially with Ivan Pace out. And I'm going to guess that like game plan wise, this is going to vary wildly. So the answer is depends on the game plan, but I guess Harrison Smith was the one coming off the field. Not a sports fan asks, what are your thoughts on how well Shaq and Gilmore have been playing? It's been fine. They're doing a lot of zoning off. They're not asking these guys to move the world. And that kind of makes sense if you're asking these guys to like straight up 1v1, Stephon Diggs and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, like that probably wouldn't have worked out well. Let them zone off, let them help each other. And what the secondary is doing very well is zone pass offs. This is the hardest part of zone is when you go from one guy's zone to the next, when the route goes from one guy's zone to the next, being able to sort of space yourself out so there isn't a window there. And it is a thing of beauty to watch them do this. It's a lot of veteran guys and they're really like, you can see the experience in that. But one thing I think those guys are doing pretty awesome is midpointing especially in quarters when you're in man outside and deeper mod. Basically means you got the whole sideline. And you got to man up with somebody. But if you're getting high load over there, so there's a high route and a low route, smash, slot, fade, something like that, they've been doing a really good job of kind of parking themselves in between the two routes such that you can't throw the deep one. I'm close enough to make a play to it. And if you throw the short one, I'll be able to make a tackle before it's too many yards. They're getting a lot of tackles that way. And I think discouraging a lot of throws too. So I think they're doing a pretty good job, but I don't think they have the hardest role on the defense by any stretch of the imagination. Chris asks, what are your thoughts on Byron Murphy? Feels like every stat in the book and grading system in the book would tell you that he's been bad, but when I watch the game, I rarely see him doing bad. Yeah, those things are very punishing to things that we're probably more forgiving of as fans that are very, very happy with the team blowing the doors off the other team. The grading systems and like coverage stats and stuff like that obviously aren't going to be forgiving. I think Byron Murphy has had some rough moments. He's missed a lot of tackles. I'm guessing you're asking about a PFF grade here. If you miss tackles, PFF will smoke you for that. So missing some tackles will do that. Some stuff that gets caught in front of him, but you're not really that mad about it, but it does count as a catch in your coverage. So, you get dinged by all the metrics on that. But ask yourself, why is it that when a slant gets caught in front of him and he makes a tackle, I'm not that mad? Like, why? It could be because schematically you're okay with that, right? It's 2nd and 10 and I gave up a 4-yard catch. I'm okay with that. And the way that he played that to take away other options, but it gave up a slant might have been a purposeful decision, a sacrifice of a short thing to not give up a long thing. So you're okay with that. Or did he just get beat and somebody else got the tackle? Like, you have to make that. So I'm not concerned about Byron Murphy, but I do think it's fair to maybe be critical because there have been some moments that aren't so good. Chris also asks, what do you think was the major reason we got blown out by the Packers last year defensively? So, Chris, if you were listening to me last year, after the Bengals game, I was like, oh no, they got solved. And people got like really mad at me at first and then slowly less and less mad at me when that turned out to be very true. But basically, I'll give you the cliff notes. You can go, there's a Patreon video if you go to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL that shows this. It's from the Bengals game about how Zach Taylor solved Brian Flores. But essentially it was attack the flats. It was turn the protection toward a slow defender so that defender is the one that backs off into coverage, that sort of exploits their blitzing rules, and then throw to that flat so that slow defender, that would be like Harrison Phillips or Jonathan Buller, that slow defender, even like Danielle Hunter, would have to, run out to the flat and you'd have a running back. That's way faster. You can get yards. And then what that caused was that deep defenders had to start moving closer because the flats were getting so smoked, and that isolated people deep. And then the Packers were able to attack that deep. They took the blueprint from Ben Johnson, who took it from Zach Taylor, and then Ben Johnson used it again, and the Vikings went 0-4 in that stretch. Everybody just, like, the recipe was out, and everybody cooked with it. The next question comes from Ken Lovin, who asks, out of all the things that have been going on with the Vikings so far this season, what do you think they've improved on most from the last season? And my answer might be defending the flats. That midpointing thing that I talked about with the corners is a huge part of that, I think. But also they've been a little bit more conservative with how they are blitzing. I mean, it's still Flores. He's still blitzing a lot. Nobody freak out. But they've been they haven't been sending 7, they haven't been sending 6 all day long. They haven't been going completely crazy on it. There's a bit more of a solid foundation to what they're doing in their coverages. And it doesn't feel like we're in an experimental territory anymore. It feels like we've got this is an identity and not a gimmick. Matt in Wisconsin asks, you studied how Flores got figured out last year. Is this year's defense figure outable? So with all of the stuff that I said before, the question of, is this figure outable? I think the answer is, of course. It's the NFL. There are a lot of smart people. Someone's going to crack the code, and then you're going to have to innovate again. And this is how every defense works ever for the history of time. But is it more figure outable than anything else? Time will tell. I certainly don't have the answer to it, but I'm just a podcaster. And I am a podcaster with a few more questions to get to, and I will round those up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And hey, if you are getting a little more into the NFL than you thought you would be this year for, I don't know, reasons, why don't you go check out FanDuel and get started over there? There's a big deal right now. If you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can live bet on FanDuel, of course. If it's halftime and you're going there making the comeback, you can do that. You can live bet in the middle of a Vikings game. If they got a 2-score lead and you're worried about it a little bit, you can put a live bet on the other team's money line, probably at really long odds, so that at least you win something if they lose, right? The old emotional hedge, I respect it. You can also check out the latest stats and view play-by-play and so much more on that page. I got all these tools to help you figure out what you want to do. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on whatever it is, whether it's those Super Bowl odds or MVP Sam Darnold odds at plus 2,800, whatever it is, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed by placing that $5 bet, whether that $5 bet wins or loses. You still get $200 in bonus bets. That is at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. It's time to get to the weird part of the Locked On Vikings mailbag, which is, of course, my favorite part of the Locked On Vikings mailbag. The next one comes from Wandel, who asks, who of the current one-year contract partners would you like to see extended, and who do you think will be too expensive? So right now, my list of people who I would love to see back in the building, I don't know if extended is the right word. Does that apply to another one-year deal? I guess so, right? But I would love to keep going with guys like Gilmore and Shaq Griffin on one-year deals. Maybe not Gilmore, because I would have the same concern. So like one of the concerns that I had going into this year with all these corners was like all these guys had question marks, right? We don't know how good Shaq Griffin is. We don't know how good Stephon Gilmore is. Shaq Griffin has been up and down and injured, and like we don't know how he's going to come off of that. Is he washed, or was it just a temporary thing? Gilmore played well last year, but age 34, that cliff comes fast, and there's no way to know if it's going to come now or later. And we've gotten like good answers to all of those questions. We've gotten the answers we wanted to all of those questions, but I don't know if we're going to get the good answer again next year. Like we got to ask all those same questions. Shaq Griffin's 30. I think if he plays well here 1 year, we can probably be fairly sure that he's going to play well again. Gilmore at 35, maybe a little tougher. Another tough one is Aaron Jones. So he's got void years in his contract, so extending him through those void years actually helps. You can give him signing bonus, and the cap hits will spread out kind of automatically for you. That's kind of nice. So the math is friendly to give Aaron Jones a little bit more run. But again, you've got the same thing. Okay, he's not old and washed at 31. Will he be old and washed at 32? When's it going to hit? Now or later? You got to ask the same questions and hope you get the good answers again. But when it's a 1 year deal thing, it's week 8, he got old. Like you get 8 bad games. It's probably worth it to risk that. On a smaller scale, guys like Jihad Ward, Jerry Tillery, Kamu Grugier-Hill, I think are all worth it. I think the guys that aren't are ones like playing their way out of it, like Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold is playing such that he is going to command like $40 million a year. Like that's the thing about it is you don't just get to keep him on cheap. Like you got to pay that dude if you're going to decide to keep him over JJ McCarthy, right? Somebody else is probably going to pay him. We can let that walk. The other one is Patrick Jones. Like, he's not on a 1-year deal rental, but he's on the last year. He's a pending free agent like the rest of those guys. And I think he's playing his way into like a Stephen Weatherly style kind of mid-tier contract with someone. And I don't think the Vikings are going to be the team to do that, to have him be depth. Somebody's going to look at him and say, maybe he can start for us. Like it's going to happen on some like rebuilding team that just needs like a guy to paper it over for 2 years or be a veteran presence or something like that. Or say, hey, maybe we're buying low on this guy that's on the ups. That's the way that kind of thing always happens. And it's like kind of always the Panthers. So it might just be the Panthers again, like DJ Wanham, Stephen Weatherly, or like an Afadi Adenabo deal with the Browns, something like that. I don't, but it's sort of always the Panthers. Kind of feel like it has to be the Panthers, just like cosmically. James Kunow says some stats out there seem to indicate that Sam Darnold has been under a lot of pressure. Does this pass the sniff test? Yeah, it does. He's been under a lot of pressure. Whose fault that pressure is something I have not looked into very hard. I'm sure you can all find your PFF numbers and get answers you're satisfied with if that's your style, but I haven't really looked at it. But yeah, he has made that pressure feel less devastating. Look, okay, we're really used to pressure being a catastrophe because Kirk Cousins was one of the worst pressure erasers in the league consistently. I don't think he was ever above average at pressured versus unpressured splits, meaning there are some quarterbacks out there that everybody's worse under pressure, but some quarterbacks sink more than others, and Cousins always was on the worst end of those charts. You get the blindside strip sacks, you get stupid throws under pressure, you just get him like getting absolutely crushed. He gets hit a lot. He always has. And Darnold is a little bit better at mitigating and minimizing that. And so I think we're just responding to not really being used to seeing minimized pressure, but still seeing it at the same volume that if it were Kirk Cousins, it probably would be the story of the season. Mario asks, is it too much of an overreaction to say the Darnold touchdown pass to Johnny Munt was the throw that separates Darnold from Cousins while we're doing this Darnold Cousins comparison thing, which is, I'm sorry, it's just going to come up a couple times. Okay, we watched this guy for 6 years. It's still on everyone's mind. The answer to this one, I think, is yes, it is too much of an overreaction. I don't think that throw separates the two. It reminded me a lot. This was the 4th touchdown. Sam Darnold goes through his entire progression and then rifles one to Johnny Munt over the middle late in the down. And there's one that I remember that's really similar. I think it was the back of the end zone instead of the front of the end zone. And the concept was totally different, but it was a similar situation where you had to go front side, back side, middle, inside the 5-yard line. I believe this was in Miami, 2022. The game Skylar Thompson started, and the Vikings won it pretty handily, but there was a weird kind of like Fugazi comeback attempt. And Cousins did that in a very similar way. Cousins could do that. That we could always trust Cousins to kind of, 1 no, 2 no, get through it on a reasonable time. He was maybe a little late earlier in the Zimmer era, but by O'Connell years, he was that rhythm was pretty dialed in. The one that separates Darnold from Cousins in a good way is the first one. Darnold escaping, getting through his progression, buying time on a scramble drill, finding Justin Jefferson. You would get that from Cousins sometimes, but you get that from Darnold a lot of the time. Grease asks, KOC extension seems to be the move. How do fans feel about a Kwesi extension? My guess is that those two things will be part and parcel. I think the Wilfs did that. They did that with Zimmer and Spielman. Those guys were basically attached at the hip. They get extended at the same time, fired at the same time. I think the Wilfs kind of want it to be like a partnership that is stable. I don't know how they would do it, but I don't think that they would prioritize coach over GM. I think that GM is more of a longitudinal thing. A short leash for a GM is 5 years. A short leash for a coach is 1. That's just the way it works because GMs, to decide if you made a good decision, you have to wait 3 or 4 years. You don't get that instant feedback. Brian Flores' lawyer asks, I'm personally of the belief that NFL teams are still blackballing Flores from ever being a head coach again, despite how unfair that probably is. Makes a sensible opinion for you to have, Brian Flores' lawyer. Do you think there's a real chance he gets poached next offseason? We're always going to be sweating that, but it's weird, isn't it? Like, he didn't get a job last year. He didn't get a call last year. You would think maybe a call. Like, I kind of understood, hey, the last 4 games, it felt like that scheme sort of fell apart. Maybe you were just doing a gimmick, but like, silence. So I don't know if, moving on to the next year, I don't know if the silence goes away, but I agree that it should. And I'm still going to be sweating it. Like, that's not comforting to me. Like, I'm still going to be really nervous about it. But that said, like, we all probably have to already be grateful that we got 2 years out of Brian Flores. And if he does get hired to be a head coach, the Vikings get compensatory picks for that. So that'll help ease the wound. Final one from Alex Conant, who asks, one good reason why the Vikings are currently underdogs against the Packers next week. I'll give you 2. 1, home field advantage. The Vikings are 2.5-point underdogs right now. Home field advantage is somewhere around, call it a 2-point thing. Some people see it as 3, some people see it as 1 or 2, I guess. I don't know. But it's roughly home field advantage, giving the Packers the majority of their favorite. On a neutral field, this would be a pick'em almost, or maybe like a 1-point favored Packers kind of deal. So they're not heavily favored, and it's Vegas kind of saying, yeah, we don't like really know, so which one of these teams is better, but the Packers are the home team. The second reason is because the Vikings need to be underdogs to continue to win. They should be underdogs for the rest of time, because apparently when you make them underdogs against a good team, they absolutely blow the doors off of that team. So this is good news for us. We can be happy about it. I will see you all tomorrow with some more lucid breakdowns of the Texans game. I'll get a chance to watch the tape and really dive in and see if I can explain a little bit more about what happened. So I will see you all for that. And as always, Skull.